So our first assignment is coming up, as a couple of people have reminded me. Take a line. It does not have to be one we walked by or one we have seen, just one that interests you. And what you'll be doing is taking a very good look at the monument, not just saying, yeah, it's a statue of a guy in a funny hat. We want to know, how much of this did I explain on the syllabus? Yeah, it's on the syllabus. It's not on the syllabus. Okay, that's good. Because usually I explain something and then I talk in class and okay. I'm sorry. Apparently I have to write my email address here so they can send me this link. Bear with me. What you will do is pick a monument that somehow has something to do with something that happened before, say, 1865. That covers basically what we will be talking about in the course of the class. And you want to describe that. Where is it? And then you want to know who did it, who made it, who was the sculptor. What happens? People don't cover the markers as they dry up. This is something I know each of you has learned in the course of your life, but dealing with faculty who just think money grows on trees. You know, it used to be the faculty member's job at the end of the class was to sweep out the classroom, because classrooms once upon a time were the only places on Suffolk where you could smoke. So the floor would be covered with cigarette butts, and also people would bring in cups of coffee and leave them on the floor. We have I guess, a higher class of people here now. So sculptor. Usually it designates someone to be who will operate the buzzer when I start just to rant about things, trying the fact that I've probably been doing this for too long. So you want to do that, Andrew? You can operate the buzzer.
Sure.
And the brown paper bag I need to breathe into when I get really overexcited about something. And let me just see, because I wanted to see where you could find material on this. Let me just see if the Boston Arts Commission has figured out what they are up to. Okay, public art in Boston. Let's just see if this is working. They used to have this great website, and then it was hacked. So you would go on, and what you would find is a link to some kind of a gambling enterprise. And when I alerted them to this, they acted as though I was crazy, which isn't, I mean, the two things are not mutually exclusive. Let's just see if we can go back to our screen here. Okay, so this is the Boston Arts Commission website. And what you see on it are lots of little dots, and each dot represents a piece of art. And so what we'll do is, it's now it's not a, yeah, I guess I clicked something. What I want to do is make this bigger. There must be a way to expand it and telling me all kinds of things I don't really need to know. Here we go. So we're expanding this. Now we're in our area, and let's just click on this and tell what it is. Okay, so here you go. This is the Soldiers and Sailors Mine, center of Boston. Yeah, the tallest point of the mine. And this tells us a lot of what you need to know in order to do more. So it tells us, for example, what's the title of the artwork? Soldiers and Sailors Line. Okay, so each piece of art, some of you are artists, you look like you're sketching things right now. It has a title, right? Soldiers and Sailors Line. It has an artist, someone who created it, Martin Milmore. So for our purposes, you would want to find out more about Martin Milmore. What else did he do? And it tells us the year it was created, 1877. And then the next step is to try to figure out why it was created, who did it, who paid for it, that kind of thing. But for this, a description which tells us what the materials are, what it conveys, other things. So that's kind of what you're doing. Picking a piece of art, taking a picture of it or video of it, and then explaining who made it, when, why, other questions. Some stories about these pieces of art are interesting, others are fairly straightforward. I know some things about some of them, and I don't want to give away things I know because then we'll color you. Anyone familiar with this, by the way, this monument? Okay, we might have to go take a look at it. I wasn't planning to tonight, but who knows? So that's one thing, just getting the basic facts, but then also what more you can find out about Martin Milmore. And you're also citing your sources. Don't just, go to Wikipedia and figure it out or do an AI thing on it, but see if you can figure out who made it, why, those questions. Okay? Yes. Well, maybe 3 pages, 5 pages. Books have been written about some of these monuments. For example, there are books about the Shaw Memorial. So if you set out to do the Robert Gould Shaw Master Fourth Memorial in 3 pages, if you can do that, great. You're probably not going to be able to, because there is a lot there. This one, maybe so. Anyway, it wasn't probably the best one to start with. But yeah, so that's basically what you're doing. Okay. Any other questions on this? And I should tell you, I am most interested in things that I don't already know. So you cite your sources too. In my practice is to use footnotes. There are different methods of citation. I didn't mean to start with this. Essentially, there are 3, 4 that have come into play for us. Do you know what they were? MLA, okay. And this is one that's probably been foisted on you by English faculty. This is one of those cases where I need the brown paper bag because I hate the MLA. This is the parent parentheses. For some reason, I don't like that. I'm not quite sure why. I've been working on it with teams of therapists. I still haven't gotten to the proof of my real antipathy toward the MLA, and I'm not quite sure it's of any interest to anyone else. It's the parentheses, where you cite something and put in parentheses with the title, page number, whatever it is. I don't know how it works because I don't use it. I forbid people to use it. Don't let people use the letters MLA in a sequence when they're talking to me, and they're really upset with this. Okay, that's one. That is one citation format. It's not the one I would use. The one I would use is the Chicago style, which is the what historians use, which is a footnote where you would put down the title or the author of whatever it was you're citing. The title, if it's an article, it goes in quotes. If it is a book, you underline it. And then the city, publisher, date. And then if there's a page number, you put that in. And then, since I'm suspecting a lot of what you're doing is on the web, you would then have the URL where you got it. The purpose of this is so the person reading it can find out where you got it. Okay. The website, the second time you cite something, you can do it shorter. So just author, title, short title in this case, date, URL. Okay. Consistency is important, but the purpose of doing this is so that someone can track down where you're getting your stuff from. History, like other disciplines, does rely on a good deal of trust that what you're doing is your own work, and also what you actually define something and you're not just making it up. And so this is why we do this. Okay. Anytime you're citing something that isn't your work, you need to cite it. Anytime you're using something that isn't your work, you need to cite it. Otherwise, it's plagiarism, which is a bad thing for a lot of reasons. I don't need to get into here. Yes. That's okay. Okay. That's not too big a problem. You can get to Cambridge. Anyone else have specific sculpt pieces of work they wanted to do? I'll tell you about a couple that I find really interesting. Let's see. Whoops. Let's see. Down on Columbus Ave. Let's see. Is this it? Nope, that's not it. Although that's an interesting one about Khalil Gibran, but that's 20th century. Yeah. Okay. There actually are two really interesting pieces on Columbus Ave in the same park. One is this relatively new sculpture of Harriet Tubman Underground Railroad, see, 1999. And then in the same park, which is here, this is strange, they're not showing it. There is the emancipation, it's an emancipation group done in early 20th century. So there are pieces pertaining to the Underground Railroad and emancipation. Others, well, there are more, but I don't want to steer you astray. There are a lot, as you can see, right around us. So yes. Double space. 12 is a good font size. It's easy to read, but I'm not going to be measuring the font and doing that kind of thing. If it's too small, it's hard to read. Also, if I say 3 pages and it's a really small font, you're going to have to write more. Also, if it's double spaced. Often when you go to cite something that is on the web, it has the date that you got it. I don't think that's necessary. Partly the reason I don't think it's necessary is it gets really depressing for me. You're reading the paper, let's say it's due on September 20th, and everything you cite you got on September 20th. In my imagination, you're spending weeks. You've already started this. You've been researching for your whole life. To find out you just wait till the last minute. It really is kind of depressing. Yes.
Never mind. I was going to argue with you, but.
Here, feel free to argue.
Well, I was going to say it's important when you're doing something related to like digital history.
Okay.
Things online change.
Things online do change, yeah. For our purposes, I don't think they're going to change that much. Okay, but you're right. And there are reasons for every form of citation. If you're a lawyer, they use a certain kind of citation. The American APA, I can't remember what the P stands for. These are all started by professional organizations, which came into vogue in the late 19th century. Each profession, like historians, started a professional organization for professional historians. Up till that time, historians had kind of just been amateurs who did this because they were interested in it. And then it became an academic profession. And here we are. But they do have a certain standard of citation. MLA is the Modern Language Association, which is people who study literature. Okay, it's not the reason I don't like them, but we'll talk about that later. Any other questions on this? I'm really happy to see people asking these questions about it. Good. So that's that assignment. And then the next question, yes. See, that's another interesting question because I hadn't thought that about. General rule of thumb, introductory paragraph. That's a good question. Should just be 3 sentences. If you find yourself writing more in the first paragraph, you've already started writing the essay. Not that the first paragraph is hard, but usually I can't write the first paragraph until I've written the whole thing and I figured out what it is I'm writing. I should tell you, I am terrible at teaching writing because I kind of know how I do it, which probably isn't how you should. Okay, so, but that doesn't mean I'm not overly critical of everyone else who tries it. But yeah, short, a 3-sentence paragraph that basically kicks the whole thing. So, for example, Harriet Tubman stepped on board in Harriet Tubman Park. There, we just found this 3 minutes ago, and now I want to start writing it soon. If I said tonight, what you're going to do is write an essay about this particular piece of public art, how would you begin? Yeah.
Talk about the time period, what it's dedicated towards, what are things going on at the time.
Okay, so the Harriet Tubman Step on Board is dedicated to what are they doing?
Underground Railroad.
The Underground Railroad. Thank you. Okay, that's 1 sentence. Okay, the question historians ask, the thing that keeps us going as historians is very simple, 2-word question. I don't know what it is. So Harriet Tubman statue dedicated to the Underground Railroad. Okay. Second sentence I would say is Fern Cunningham, the sculptor. We know this from reading this brief thing. Was a sculptor and was put up in 1999. And then next sentence is the one that gets the reader think, I want to keep reading to find out more about this. So what do you notice? So has anyone seen this in real flesh? I mean, in real life? It's a great mind. Step on board. That's the title of the statue. What does that mean?
It's like a play on words because like stuff on board the train, but there's not an actual train. It's the Underground Railroad, so she's leading escaped slaves to freedom.
That's good. And again, too, this can lead you into any number of directions. It's a play on the word, the idea of stepping on a train, just like the notion of an underground railroad was a play on something. Because remember, when was the Underground Railroad? What time period roughly? I know you came into class to learn this stuff. And now I'm expecting you already know it, and you're thinking, boy, if we already knew this, there would be no point in another being here. Is it before or after the Civil War? It's before, thank you. Okay. Well, let's back up a minute. When was the railroad invented? Does anyone know where the first railroad in the United States was? What?
Intercontinental or just the railroad?
Well, there has to be a railroad somewhere if they say, hey, let's build one across the country. No one hears from the city of Quincy on this. You're smiling. You know anyone in Quincy? No, you've heard of it.
My mother's name.
Oh, your mother's in Quincy? Where's she from?
New Hampshire.
Okay. First railroad in the United States was built in the city of Quincy in 1832. 3 blocks ran from the far east down to the Four Rivers, but always built under Hilltop. And at the same time in England, they were developing railroads, that is, trains with steam engines. And there was a guy named John Stevens in Hoboken, New Jersey, who played around with steam engines. And he had a little steam engine running around Hoboken on his estate. So railroads themselves only come into existence in the 1830s. By the end of the 1830s, there's something of a mania for building railroads, 1840s, 1850s. And at the same time, you have this escape system for enslaved people, bringing them from slave states like Maryland, where Harriet Tubman was mainly operating, into free states like Pennsylvania. You have these two developments, this system of bringing people to freedom on something called an underground railroad that wasn't a railroad and wasn't underground. It was called underground because it was secret. So it's a new technology. But about the same time, Nathaniel Hawthorne wrote a short story called The Celestial Railway, which is about a train that takes people to heaven. And he is modeling it on John Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress, where there's a Vanity Fair. And the Pilgrim's Progress, you're familiar with this book? Written in the 1500s, 1600s, about a guy who's on his way to heaven, the Celestial City, Celestial Railroad, easier way to get to heaven is on a train. So it's a new technology. So again, Andrew's point that step on board is a play on words. The whole concept of the Underground Railroad is a play on words. So something short in your third sentence would allow you then to get to this, talking then about the Underground Railroad, and then about who Fern Cunningham is and how she captures this in this monument, as well as something about Harriet Tubman, who is the leading character in this monument. Backside of the monument has kind of a map of the Underground Railroad. One of my particular pet peeves about the monument is the back of it shows the Underground Railroad bringing people into Ohio and then across the Great Lakes into Canada, which is one of the routes. But why do you have a monument to the Underground Railroad in Ohio in Boston? Because the North Slope of Beacon Hill has more sites associated with the Underground Railroad in a small area than any other place in the country. So whoever did the back of the monument was glossing over that important fact. So if you're writing about that monument and you know this is something that I vent about, you might want to mention that. So that's, I don't know, is anyone writing furiously everything I've said and figure out how many words that is? And you would be done by now if you had been doing that. You might have to find citations to find out what I'm saying is actually. So that's kind of what you'll be doing. Any other questions on this? Or now that you know how easy it is to get me talking, you'll say, hey, can you tell us about the Paul Revere statue? And again, the guy who is, there's a competition to do a statue of Paul Revere. And Cyrus Dallin is the artist who won the competition. But unfortunately for him, Daniel Chester French, at that time, I believe, chaired the Arts Commission, and he hated Dallin, didn't think he did a good horse, and didn't want it built. So Dallin wins the competition to design the Revere Monument sometime in the 1890s, and I think it went up in the 1940s. So anyway, all these monuments have stories. You'll find them, and now you have to spend the next couple of hours listening to me when you could be doing research into these monuments. Any other questions? Yes. Okay, good. And why don't we talk about, where did we leave off last time?
Native American tribes.
Let's have people other than speak up. Okay. That's more specific than simply Indians. The Opechancanough. Violations of the Iroquois. Also remember about this. Okay, let's see, I thought I had a map here showing this. No, we can dispense with it and I'll draw maps if we need them. So Native people, the map we saw had a lot of them. Native American language families, Native American ways of living, and there are lots of different Native societies. And you've just reminded me, I do teach a class on this, so I don't want to get too far afield from the colonial period. There are different ways that we try to make sense of the extraordinary variety of Native people. One is through languages, as I think we talked a little bit about last time. Others about ways of life. And this is also determined in many ways by their environment. So if you live in the area where the Navajo are, the desert, the Navajo, the Ute, the Apache, the Hopi, you're in a desert area. So you're going to live differently than people who live in, say, relatively forested New England. And New England, the people of New England tend to be Algonquian speakers, another way of distinguishing. And the Algonquian speakers really range from the coast of Virginia up through New England and then west into Canada, to really toward the Great Lakes. Here in New England, they live differently than people did along the Great Lakes or in Virginia. Here in New England, the Native people would migrate from the interior, not too far in the interior, to the coast. In the summertime, they would live along the islands in Boston Harbor. These are the Massachusetts people. Or Massachusetts. And it is a word, series of words in their language that means, anyone know? Should I stop saying, does anyone know when I throw out some seemingly random fact? It means people of the Great Hills. Yes, we're going to say. The people is part of it, and of the Great Hills. Because in the winter, they would go up the rivers, which surround them, into the Blue Hills south of Boston, which is where they would spend the winters. You want to get away from the ocean in the wintertime, and so they would go up here in the winter and then come down the river, living on the harbor islands in the summer. And they call this particular peninsula Shawmut, which means place of living water. And their way of life was quite similar to other Native people who lived along the coast, particularly Algonquins. Most Native peoples also had societies, relatively small groups, and decisions were made by consensus where everyone would speak, and both men and women participated in decision making. And as far as who you are in the family, you would belong to a clan, but the clan membership depended on what clan your mother was in. They're matrilineal societies in that way. Descent passes through the mother. That's kind of it. Their creation story, and I'm not sure I know their creation story of the Massachusetts, does have them basically here. The Iroquois creation story has them created there, different Native people created in different areas. They are, as you said, the people, and most of them are matrilineal societies. And most of them also live by farming. The women do the farm work, which is planting corn, beans, and squash. And the men protect them from others and also hunt, supplementing their diet by hunting. The women, again, the agricultural work includes the men would put fish weirs into the back bay. High tide brings in lots of fish. The tide goes out, leaving behind lots of fish. The women go and gather the fish. They fry them and they smoke them actually to dry them. And then you can keep these fish from eating them. Source of protein. Other kinds of things they would eat, deer meat, other animals, and also using all parts of the animal. So this is kind of how they were living. Native people who had different resources in different areas would use other things. Also, all Native people in North America use tobacco, usually for ceremonial purposes. Tobacco indigenous to the Americas, unknown in Europe at the time of European arrival. So that's kind of a lot about Native people, what they're up to when the Europeans arrive in the 1490s, or begin arriving, I should say, in the 1490s, but not here. There probably were Basque fishermen in the area. I think we talked about Vikings and others who were showing up in the area earlier. The real influx of Europeans into the Americas begins in the 1500s with the Spanish. And we talked, I think, about why the Spanish were coming, didn't we? You're nodding your heads. Yes. Why were they coming? We were doing so well too. Yes. They're looking for gold. I mean, they find gold. They weren't necessarily looking for it, but they find it particularly on the islands and on the continent of Mexico and Peru. And gold had become the standard of value in Europe. And the Portuguese had found gold in West Africa. But when we say they found gold, people there already knew there was gold. And the folks in what is today, what was then Guinea, the mountains of Guinea, had been mining gold and then using it to trade in Timbuktu, and then it would go across the Sahara into the Mediterranean and into the Arabian Peninsula. So Timbuktu, there's gold there. The Portuguese had diverted the trade of gold to the coast from the interior, and now the Spanish come to the Americas and find huge resources of gold, and they're looking for more. And what then happens is this, unless there's something else someone wanted to ask before we get to what happens when the Spanish find all this gold, and it makes Spain, it really allows Spain to unite, because Spain had been looking for gold. What reason was they were looking for gold? That's that. Why would they? Yeah, so they lost money in the Reconquista, and so that's part of it. Did they want to continue their holy war against the Infidels? Yeah, they want to pursue the wars into North Africa, and they need more money for that because wars are very expensive. Okay. So here they find all of this gold, and this is a great thing for the Spanish. It allows them to unite. They become the most powerful country in Europe, supplanting the Genoese, the Venetians. Remember, the Genoese and Venetians had kept anyone else from trading in the Mediterranean. Thus, the Portuguese had gone around Africa. The Spanish go west. They find all this gold here, and this makes them a lot more powerful than the Genoese and the Venetians. So this is the triumph of Spain, the unification of Spain. Is anyone here Spanish, by the way? We would allow you to start singing the Spanish national anthem at this point as a celebration of Spain's imperial glory, as Spain becomes the center of everything. And one thing that happens when you become the center of everything is everyone looks at you with admiration and wants to be exactly like you. Has that been your experience? When you're on top, people say, good, finally, Spain is on top. That is great for everyone. No, you're shaking your head. No. Other folks in Europe see this and say, why don't we find that goal too? And Spain is at war with the Dutch. In fact, they colonized the Netherlands. This, by the way, involves a lot of European politics. I don't know a whole lot about European politics. Sure, I could point to anyone in the room who could tell us more about 15th century Europe than I know. Do you want me to do that? Is there someone here who's been just waiting to talk about Philip IV and the Holy Roman Empire? And good, okay. I was probably just going to go tell the dean. He doesn't really know anything. Anyway, other European countries which had not been long united themselves look at what Spain has done and say, well, why don't we do the same thing? Why don't we sail west and find all of this gold, and thus we can become the top nation? So what you have in 1500s are other European nations contesting with Spain and Portugal control of the New World. The French are one, and the French, here's the problem. If you want to contest with control of the New World with Spain, there's a limit to where you can go, because the Spanish by this time are in control of a pretty big area. Tenochtitlan, which was the capital of the Inca Empire, the Mayan Empire, Aztec Empire, I'm sorry, was largest city. It was larger than any city in Europe when the Spanish arrived in the first decade or so of the 1500s. And the way the trade worked was there were all these smaller islands, bigger islands, smaller islands, bigger island, Cuba, and then Santo Domingo, Puerto Rico, Jamaica. Spain had pretty much taken these bigger islands as their first base. I mean, they first land on these islands. And then they are, notice these folks have gold. They get to the interior, or get to the mainland. There's lots of gold here. Focus their attention on conquest of Mexico and then of Peru, down here, the Inca Empire. And they are very strongly guarding this area. And they are mining gold in Mexico and loading up their transports, bringing everything first to Cuba, and then on an annual fleet, it goes back. Spain, Seville is the one port which anyone in Spain would want. The Spanish government very closely controls who gets to go to the New World. The Spanish government has the wherewithal to do this, to prevent just anyone from saying, hey, why don't we go there and get gold? If you're in Spain, you can't just go. And certainly if you are in France, England, the Netherlands, you also can't just get on a ship, go over here and find gold. And the Spanish also are patrolling this area to keep out anyone who tries to get to any of these places. So what you do, if you're another European power, and you want to find gold, is you go to places where the Spanish aren't. Now, I should also point out, the Portuguese controlled Brazil. And the Portuguese are really doing a lot in Brazil in the 1500s, 1600s. Their main focus is actually Asia, but Brazil is important for the Portuguese, so important that when a group of French folks set up shop in what becomes Rio de Janeiro. The Portuguese go and fill them. They don't want anyone else here. Some French also come here to the periphery of the Spanish world along the St. John's River and put a little colony here, and the Spanish find it and wipe it out because they don't want anyone else intruding. Back in the 1470s, in the 1490s, actually in 1494, another date for you to remember, Spain and Portugal were contesting this area, and the Pope very nicely drew a line around the world and said, okay, anything on this side of the line, the Portuguese can have, anything on this side, the Spanish can have. And it happens that the tip of the coast of South America, the tip of what is today Brazil, a fellow named Cabral found sailing for Portugal, and that becomes their claim to Brazil, which becomes the largest country in the New World at one time, only empire in the New World. Long story. The Portuguese certainly don't want the French. So the Portuguese and the Spanish agree. You stay on that side of the line, you stay on this side of the line, but then that leaves out the French, the English, the Swedes, Scandinavians, the Dutch, everyone else. And okay, so the French try to plan something in La Florida, doesn't work. So in the 1560s, the Spanish do plant St. Augustine and to protect this area. Other European powers are looking some of these smaller islands we can plant because the Spanish can't guard every little island, and they're essentially using these little islands. And everyone else, every other European power comes to the New World, expects they're going to find gold, because that's what the Spanish do. No one else does. Great disappointment to all of them. So you haven't found gold. Putting this to you in very rough shorthand, but what would you do if you don't find gold or silver? If this were like business class, you'd see that we failed at what we set out to do. Get gold and silver. We still want something like gold or silver, which the Spanish are finding in abundance. It becomes actually something they all put in their charters. Okay. We don't need to talk too much more about this. Grave disappointment for Europeans. I don't know how many of you are going to lose sleep over this particular issue tonight. Those poor folks didn't find gold or silver. What will they do? Well, one thing that happens is the Dutch are at war with Spanish for much of this. And they realize the Spanish every year are loading up these big, heavy, slow ships to bring all of this gold over to Spain. We haven't been able to build big, heavy, slow ships to load up with gold because we haven't found any gold. Also, we're not quite as rich as the Spanish are, but we have smaller, fast ships. And what we can do, we know which way they're coming. And between they sail this area, as you may know, there's a chain of islands here, the Bahamas, and the Dutch will wait in these islands for this big, heavy fleet of ships to sail by, and they'll go and attack some of the slower ones. All you need to do is get one. So the Dutch begin attacking the Spanish ships and stealing the gold from them. That's certainly one thing you can do. I'm not saying you should do that. I'm not advocating stealing, but it is something the Dutch are doing. And they also realize the Spanish, all they're interested in is getting gold, and they're getting it, but they need other stuff. What we can do is sell stuff. And the people who find the gold are the Spanish, do very well by it. But in the long run, it's the ones who figure out how to trade for other things and get the gold from them to benefit more. So the Dutch, the English, the French do very well through trading. The Dutch probably more so than any. Meanwhile, are there any questions on this, by the way? I realize I'm just starting a sermon here on economic development. And I guess your one lesson is to find gold. I should tell you, just as a kind of shorthand, this whole era gives rise to economic theory that prevails in the Western world. In some cases, it still prevails, but it's the prevailing economic doctrine until the late 18th century. So until about the time of the American Revolution. It's the economic theory of mercantilism, which has derived out of this whole idea of getting colonies for the purpose of extracting wealth, which you then bring back to the mother country. So colonies are seen merely as places from which you extract wealth. Okay, and also they're seen as kind of a drain on the mother country. And this is why the Spanish control who gets to go to the colonies, because the thinking is everyone who leaves Spain is a lost thing. So we want to control who goes here. And then shortly after this, the Spanish venture across the Pacific to the Philippines, keeping control of them, but with a small group of Spanish folks who go there, we control who goes there. One, the object of this, and it's a national. The goal for the nation, and the nation state is something really just being developed, the idea of is to get gold. It's the measure of wealth, and whoever gets the most gold wins. In order to protect the trade routes are important. They rely on sea routes. You need to control the sea, so you have to build the Navy to support this. And also, you want to make sure that everyone who can is trading with you and not with your adversary. Yet thus you protect your own commerce by imposing tariffs on trade to protect your own economic enterprise. And the tariffs pay for the Navy that supports the trade routes and helps you secure gold. These are the principles of mercantilism, which is, as I said, the prevailing economic doctrine in Europe, and by which the European powers between the 1500s and the 1700s amass wealth and power. Much of this is then proven wrong by the 1700s, which we'll talk about some later. Okay. I'm giving you the economic theory of this components. Now, the English are the ones who are going to settle the eastern coast of North America. But before we get to the English, we had the French trying to set up shop here in St. Augustine. And then in the early decade of the 1600s, did we talk about this last time? I'm losing track of how much I've already told you that I know you will hold with you for the rest of your lives. Okay. The French are also in competition with the Spanish. I mentioned St. Augustine doesn't go well. They also plant someone down in Brazil, that doesn't go well. And then they go further north. And this area, this island off of here, which the French call Acadia, Acadie, Samuel Champlain had tried to plant a colony there in about 1604 or so. Spends a winter there and realizes this isn't a very good place. Has anyone been to Nova Scotia? You have. What's love to like?
Good. Summer, but it's just cold and horrible.
Yeah. They kind of knew about it from the fishing that happened there every spring. Fishermen from other countries of Europe would go to Acadie or to Newfoundland, and fish, but then not be around in the winter. There are native people there, Micmac, again, adapted to the environment. And Champlain spends a winter here, so it's not really a good place. Goes a little further south, actually, to Cape Cod, where he spends the summer in 1606, then gets into fights with the Indians, and then realizes it doesn't work. So it goes back north. They're thinking of hanging out on the coast. So sails up this bay, and in 1608, I believe, plants a settlement at Quebec. And then a year or two later, further up the river at Montreal, and he is encounters a group of native people who are part of the Huron Confederation. And they say, okay, here's from this guy who has really sophisticated weapons. And we've already talked about this. I can't remember if I told you, or if I happened to be in a bar somewhere and telling this story. No, it wasn't. You weren't at that same bar. Hearing about Champlain, and they said, hey, we'd like you to meet some other folks. So they go up this little river, which he names for one of the French ministers, Cardinal Richelieu. And then this river is fed into by a big lake. And does anyone know what Champlain names the lake? Lake Champlain, yes, he names it Lake Champlain. And they really want to introduce him to some people that they don't like. And these are the Mohawks. And so Champlain and the Huron get into a fight with the Mohawk along Lake Champlain. And then they really like the Huron like Champlain for that. And Champlain goes back to Quebec and says, hey, you know what? We'd really like it if, again, he'd like to find gold. They don't have gold here, but he notices they have a lot of furs and different kinds of furs, which he knows he can sell in Europe. So he says, hey, how about instead of just catching these animals and using the furs for your own use, you sell them to us and we'll pay you for them. In firearms, which is something we have, you've seen the way this gun worked against the Mohawk, and other stuff that the French are manufacturing. We'll pay you for the furs. We'll bring the furs back to Europe, or we can sell them, and we'll get gold. So it's a convoluted way of getting gold from furs. So, and don't let the Mohawk interfere with your trade. So the Huron then getting furs from throughout this area, you probably know, Lake the St. Lawrence River is fed into by a big series of lakes, which are in the center part of the continent. And this is a great thing for the creation of New France. This whole area, the small number of French, again, just as the Spanish government was told who gets to go to the New World, so does the French government. Few fur traders will go, along with some priests and nuns, and we will send a lot of Jesuits so that we can convert the native people, and thus they will be our allies. That's what's going on with New France. Now, here's another thing that happened in the 1500s that is worth talking about briefly. The Spanish, one motivate, I made it sound like all they wanted to do was fight. There was a big religious movement going on in Europe at this time. The Spanish and the Portuguese were part of the one true faith, the Catholic Church. The northern part of Europe was being beset by folks who did not believe in the one true faith anymore. They thought that the Catholic Church had become too overweening and too much concentrating on gathering wealth and prestige, and had given up on the real purpose of religion, which was, what was it according to these folks? Purpose of religion, to aggrandize the clergy and build monuments, or I'm not proselytizing. I'm not here to get at what you might think or what the true purpose of religion is, but what someone else in the 1400s, 1500s might have thought the true purpose was. Yes.
The Quakers, they wanted to have a relationship with God.
Yeah, okay. It's a relationship with God. That's the Quakers kind of take it to an extreme, but there's another religious movement that says the purpose of this is for each individual to get right with God. And you don't do that by building cathedrals. You get to it through something. So there is a movement that actually begins within the Catholic Church, protesting against the power of the church and its collusion with the state and the clergy, the control they have, which they think is a distortion of the true meaning of the faith. And because they are protesting against the power of the cardinals and the Pope in overseeing this enterprise, they are sometimes called Protestants because they are protesting something. In 1517, a Catholic priest named Martin Luther writes out 75 arguments he has against the way the church is conducting itself, nails them to the door of a church. He's excommunicated, but he's part of a religious movement which is spreading through Europe in opposition not only to the power of the Pope, but to the power of Spain and Portugal and these other powers. And countries in Northern Europe and even in France, people are embracing this Protestant movement. Now, the Spanish react not by saying, oh, good for them, we think everyone should be able to follow their own way. No, they're reacting quite vociferously against this, but also see, okay, we have lost souls. People we just found here in the world, we should try to bring them to the one true faith. There's also a big question. Because according to the Christian doctrine, where do people come from according to the Christian doctrine? Christian tradition. Also the Jewish tradition, Muslim tradition. Yes? But by someone other than Andrew. I mean, you and I can just have a dialogue, which would be fun for us, but not only getting the rest of you into the game. You don't realize it's a game. There are winners and losers. And yes.
I'm not answering the religious question, but more on the note of Protestants. I think it's interesting how none of it would have without the printing press.
Thank you for bringing that up. Without the printing press, which a fellow named Gutenberg had developed in the 1400s, printing the Bible, and then also printing the Bible in so that everyone can read it. According to the Catholic tradition at this time, and this actually makes a good deal of sense. The Bible is in, anyone know what language it's in? I should say, yes. Part of it is in Hebrew, yes. Particularly the books of the Old Testament, yes. Also, there are books that are in Latin, yes, and Greek. So in order to read the Bible, you need to be able to read Latin, Greek, and Hebrew. Who here can read those three languages? Okay, so this is why in the Catholic Church at this period, the Bible is something you had priests to read and explain to you. And the Catholic Mass would consist of the rituals and the reading of the scriptures, which would be done in either Latin, Greek, or Hebrew, and then a brief part where the priest would explain what they meant to you. You aren't going home and reading it, because what happens, even if people are reading something in their own language, they're going to interpret it in wildly different ways. So what you want to do, and it's a relatively complicated book. So what you need to do is have an educated clergy who can explain this to you. And we don't want anyone getting their hands on a Bible because they will read it and they will misinterpret it. And then you'll have all kinds of problems with that. So what happens during this period is the Spanish and the Portuguese and other Catholic countries create within each one an inquisition. This is an inquiry to make sure people aren't reading books that are heretical or even having a Bible, because you're not supposed to have a Bible. Right? Okay, so you have this
keeping this out of the hands of people, but then you have Gutenberg. And by the way, it was easy because the only way to have a book is for someone to copy it out. And that takes a long time. So there are very few copies of books until the printing press makes it possible to print a lot more books. And the first book that Gutenberg prints is a Bible. People can now buy Bibles, not everyone, particularly not in a Catholic country. And then becomes a move, well, how about translating it into vernacular languages or vulgar languages, as they're called? And this begins, one of the first is in Geneva, group of Protestants there, translating the Bible into English, translating it into other languages as well. Martin Luther wants to translate it into German so people can read this. And they still need an educated clergy to explain it, but now you can have your Bible and you can read it. And this, to the Spanish and to the Portuguese, is heresy. And they see these souls, not as they found a different way to Christ, but they've actually left the one true faith. So what we will do in the new world is find new people that we can bring into the faith. And this gets us back to the question I was trying to beat out of you before Otto raised the printing press issue. I'm glad you did, because this is essential to the whole thing. There aren't printing presses, by the way, in Spanish America until much later, because we don't see a need for people to read the books.
One of the first printing presses in the world was in Cambridge, and there they printed a Bible in native language.
Yes. The Massachusetts language.
It's very
Yes.
cool.
Yes, John Eliot prints this Bible in the 1650s, 1660s with the help of a couple of Massachusetts guys. James the printer is one who helps print the Bible, translated into the Algonquian language. At this time, it's not a written language, but it is transliterated. So someone knowing how you pronounce English letters could then read it out loud. So you can read it out loud. Other people knowing the words then could understand it. Okay, but this is not something you're going to see happening here, although the Spanish and the Portuguese are working to convert the native people to bring them to the one true faith. Was a kind of a complication here. Under the Reconquista, which we've talked a little bit about, the Spanish, the Christian Spanish, recovering the Iberian Peninsula, would give control of certain areas to a certain knight who would help secure it. And he would then be instructed to instruct these people in the one true faith. And because he is bestowing on them, through their adoption of the one true faith, the gift of eternal life, what they will do is work for him. So it's a system of getting these people who are being converted to work for someone with an encomendero is the word for it. And this is something they apply that in the new book. We are bringing these people to the one true faith. The least they can do, since we're giving them eternal life, is work for us in either the mines or the Portuguese had begun planting sugar on the sugar islands off of the coast of Africa, in Madeira, the Spanish on the Canaries, and then the Portuguese Cape Verde. Sugar is a crop that the Europeans had learned about during the Crusades, a series of religious wars against Muslims. Sugar was growing in the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, and the Europeans who were fighting against the Muslims during the Crusades were actually growing sugar on Sicily, Malta, other islands in the Mediterranean, using the captive labor of prisoners of war. And so that's going on in the 1300s, 1400s, and then the Portuguese introduce it to Madeira in the also in the 1400s, and the Spanish to the Canaries at the same time. And then as the Spanish are coming upon these islands, they're introducing sugar here as well as tobacco. Tobacco already was growing here, but the Spanish discovered here it's something it grows here and can be sold in Europe at a great profit. And in fact, by the end of the 1500s, there is a tobacco craze even in Europe, in Asia. And tobacco is being grown on the Philippines and traded into China. So tobacco is the first real crop other than gold that are developing here in the New World. And they are using the labor of these native people to produce it. And this causes something of a problem. There's a Spanish priest, but he's actually a Spanish guy who arrives here. He's one of these encomenderos, Bartolomeo de las Casas. He'd come to the New World in around the first decade of the 1500s, and he has a plantation producing tobacco and doing pretty well. But he thinks, wait a minute. We've come here for the purpose of bringing these people to God. And what we're doing is actually mercilessly exploiting them. Is that really morally just? And he doesn't think it is. He goes back to Spain. He becomes a priest. He writes about the crime against the Indies that are in. It causes a big debate in Spain about the morality of enslaving the native people and killing them by making them grow tobacco for us, mine gold for us, do this other kind of brutal exploitation that's happening in the New World. And I should say that Las Casas's book, The Crime Against the Indies, and other books of this debate are translated into other, actually, because this is at a time when all educated people would read and write in Latin, these works are then circulating in Latin in countries which are on the verge of war with Spain. As they're reading what the Spanish are saying about what they are doing in the New World, and we agree with them what the Spanish are doing in the New World is brutal, horrible. The Spanish are terrible people. That's what they're saying at the time. When I say things like that, I'm not saying the Spanish are terrible people. They're very good people. They're trying to live a moral life, trying to bring these people to God, and instead they're killing them. This is a big moral quandary. Any thoughts for what the Spanish might do to rectify this? We didn't come here to think about the soul of the King of Spain, but here it is. It's presented to us. So they stopped brutally exploiting people. Instead, they preach to them, and everyone lives together happily ever after in one big communal family. You're looking really skeptical of this idea. You think, boy, that sounds like kind of a boring class. We're just talking about people living communally together happily. Doesn't sound accurate. Okay, good. You see through that. Okay, here's the thing. Back in the 1400s, when the Portuguese were rounding Africa, they encountered a similar problem in Africa. And what they were looking for in rounding Africa was both a route to India, where there's tremendous wealth. Also, somewhere in East Africa, there was a mythical, Christian king, Prester John. Ethiopia was a Christian kingdom, and Prester John was supposed to have a table, an apron bread inlaid with diamonds, made of gold. This is all a sense that he's really wealthy. And if they could hook up with him, he could help them fight against Muslims. So they are going around the Dar el-Islam to try to hook up with Prester John and to get to India. And then they run into this problem. During their reconquest of their part of the Iberian Peninsula, they would, as the encomenderos would enslave infidels, Jews or Muslims would not embrace the one true faith.
And now here they are in Africa, and some of the people they encounter are Muslims, but others are not. They're not Muslims, they're not Jews, they're not Christians. They are trading with some of these folks in West Africa for gold, or gum, or ivory. And what they would do is come to one place and trade for ivory, and here they kind of need ivory, so they trade that, take gum, trade that for gold, go back. But in all of these places, there's also a demand for capital, for labor. And in Africa, the custom was, as in other places, even in during the Crusade, you could enslave people you had captured in war. And so in all of these places, there was a demand for laborers, and so the Portuguese also began buying and selling people at different places. Here, for example, in Home is a place that's always at war with its neighbors, so always has captives to sell, which the Portuguese can then sell to the gold folks, because they need these folks to work in the mountains here digging gold. And then the Portuguese have a surplus, so they take to these islands, putting these people to work on the sugar islands, Cape Verde and Madeira, and so on. So the Portuguese, and even bringing some of these Africans back to Portugal. So by the early 1500s, something like 10% of the population of Portugal were people of African descent, called Ladino. But here is the moral problem the Portuguese have to solve first. Is it legitimate to enslave people who are not infidels? And these people, you can't be an infidel unless you know about the faith you were rejecting. And these people apparently had never heard anyone profess a faith that they could reject. So is it legitimate to enslave them? And the Pope says no, but if they are hostile to the faith, then you can. So if they just don't know about the faith, no, you know, like that's a kind of a fine point. They just don't know about the faith, you can't enslave them, but if you've given them an opportunity and they reject it, then yes. And you know, we're not really scrutinizing this that closely. The Portuguese are in the business of then enslaving folks who have already been enslaved in Africa. And then, of course, there's a market now for more. So the Portuguese have begun doing this, and this gets us back in the 1400s, and this gets us to the 1500s when Bartolomeo de las Casas is writing about the crime against the Indies. We've been enslaving these people who we were supposed to be saving, and says, I mean, you read this, and it says, great attack on what the Spanish are doing in the New World. And they say, and he says, what we should do instead is buy the people in Africa from the Portuguese, because they've already been doing this. So in 1517, a group of Ladinos, that is people who had been enslaved in Portugal, sold to the Spanish, are brought to the New World, actually to the island of Saint Domingue, to work in a gold mine there. And this begins a transatlantic trade from Africa to the New World in 1517. So the Spanish are not going to be enslaving native people. Many of the native people have died in this process. Instead, they will turn to the Portuguese. Although I should say, all of the European powers who are coming to the New World are going to be using one form of bound labor or another. So this is really the development of the economies of the New World as these different European powers are contesting with each other for control and also looking for sources of labor to extract gold or produce tobacco or later sugar or the other goods that are going to be essential to the New World economy. Probably a good time for us to take a break. I'm probably good for another hour of just talking, but I know you folks probably need a break. So only take about 10 minutes.
Both the monkeys, where they got the Spanish, what was their name? Like the people that were arguing slave in West Africa, not South. The what?
Dinos?
Yeah.
That's just the word meaning they speak Latin language.
These are the sprawlings of a crazy bit.
One thing, the other day is like the hallway.
The break,
Excuse me?
the break.
It's like 10 minutes or so. Do you want to run out?
Right. That's true. All right.
Thank you. Really?
Just to make this.
Very.
Notice in his past classes. Yes, he's maybe okay. That's why I'm sure these all expect based on the first for them to be able to. Like, yeah. That makes sense. I feel pretty about like grammar and like structure and like, he really likes to point out like article flaws. But really is looking at like, you know, you would. Yeah. Yeah. Unless he has a secret one thing that he hasn't looked at.
Okay, any questions about anything? Whole mess of stuff happening. Okay, so, the English are a little late to adopt Protestantism, long story, Henry VIII, the whole thing. This is really a fascinating story, I'm not gonna share it with you. You do have a problem in England in wanting to get at the same things that everyone else has, but not having the capital to do it. That is, the English crown is pretty much broke because England between the 1400s and late 1500s has been having a series of wars, civil wars, other things, which I advise you simply to plays about this whole period. And you have no real capital that is money in the English crown to finance it. But there are groups of English who are interested in the New World, in colonization and discovering these new lands. There's actually an uncle and a nephew, both named Richard Axel, who are writing about all of these exploration things going on, and other people like Walter Raleigh, who's interested in contesting with Spain for control of the New World. And Raleigh had tried to plant a colony along the Orinoco River, another place that is far enough away from the real Spanish control that they can hope to actually plant something and actually start growing tobacco here. So Raleigh, by the early 1600s, is late 1500s, early 1600s, is selling tobacco from the Orinoco River in England. So much so that King James the First writes a pamphlet attacking tobacco, the counterblast to tobacco. A loathsome thing resembling the Stygian pit that is bottomless, loathsome to the eye, hateful to the lungs, other things. Sounds like Cambridge City Council attacking tobacco, but there's King James the First doing it. So popular thing. The dean cautions me about saying too much about how great tobacco is, but it is something very popular, great commodity. Like my mother was an adamant smoker for 75 plus years, and always didn't like what she called this secondhand smoke nonsense that it's somehow sprouted up, that it's not the most healthy thing you can be doing. Is anyone here a smoker, by the way? I should have asked it. I know in some places you're fired if you're an employee and you actually smoke anywhere near the place. I suspect we may have gone that. See, I'm starting to get nostalgic. I feel like lighting up, even though I've never been a smoker, as I'm talking about this. And Raleigh sees a real market for tobacco, and this can be a thing. We can undercut the Spanish. We can sell it in other places, and this will be great for England. The problem England has, one of the many problems England has, is the crown has no capital, but there are groups of merchants who do, and they form joint stock companies as a way of funding expeditions to trade in certain areas. And these are, actually, this is the genesis of contemporary corporations. If you're talking about mercantilism, now talking about the development of corporations, think, well, this isn't business history. We wanted to learn other stuff. Business and religion, it seems to be all I'm interested in talking about. And this is the development of this way of financing voyages to the New World. And the first several that Raleigh helps to instigate or others do turn out to be disasters. One thing the English all believe is they know the Spanish have really botched it. They know the Spanish really have massacred the Indians. We are not going to do that. The Indians will like us because we're not Spanish. And that is actually a persistent thought among the English, that people will like us because we are not all of these other people that we know not to be very good people. I don't want to give ethnic stereotypes here, but it is from my own long experience, the way of thinking among English folks. Does anyone disagree with this? I don't know if anyone wants to challenge this and say, no, the English don't think they are better than everyone else, and the world will profit by their example. So, song from the 19th century about how, in spite of all temptations to belong to other nations, he remains an Englishman. And there's nothing better you can make. So, setting out with these ventures financed by joint stock companies, the English set out to plant colonies which will trade with the native people, and the native people will reward them for not being French, Spanish, or Portuguese by trading with them equitably, and all will live happily ever after. That's kind of the idea here. So in the 1580s, 1590s, you do see small groups of English people going to the New World, often called adventurers. For example, one of my favorites is the Company of Dorchester Adventurers, setting off from Dorset. An adventurer is not what you might think of as an adventurer. It is someone who is making a speculation, a financial speculation, and so a venture like this into this new world. And again, just as the French had gone to New France, they are looking for areas on the periphery of the Spanish Empire, so far enough away from the Spanish so the Spanish won't kill them, which doesn't always work, but close enough so they will find the thing the Spanish have also found, which is gold. And in fact, these corporate charters do mandate that they want the proceeds from the gold that they are sure to find here in these areas of the New World. So the first English venture here after Orinoco, and a few others we don't need to mention, is along the Chesapeake, this area here. First one actually in the 1590s, that Sir Walter Raleigh sent, doesn't work out at all. In fact, they all disappear, and it's unclear why. Here's just a cautionary tale for you before we get to what the English are doing, because the Spanish recognize other colonial powers are venturing here, and the Spanish have given you their reaction to the death of the Indians or the crime against the Indians. They also realize we have this big, expansive frontier to protect. We don't have the military resources to patrol it all. So what we need to do is enlist the support of native people in these areas to be our allies. The Portuguese had made allies of folks in West Africa and in the area that becomes the Congo. The Spanish see no reason why they can't make alliances with native people in areas along this frontier to help them protect it. And so the Chesapeake is one area they find. We go further north from St. Augustine, where they planted a settlement and made alliances with the Timucua and other native people in La Florida, 1564. That's actually one of the oldest parishes in the country at this moment. And then sometime in the 1570s, a party of Jesuits are a religious order, a Catholic religious order, who are, again, countering this Reformation, which has taken people away from the true gospel. And it's founded as a military order with great discipline. And the Jesuits are determined, this is a question I asked a couple of hours ago, probably seems like a couple of days ago now, about where do people come from? And the Christian tradition is that everyone is descended from Adam and Eve. How then do you explain all of these people in the New World? And the Spanish and others are trying to determine where they came from. So one thing the Jesuits are doing is asking these people to tell them their story of how they got there, their creation story. And much of what we know about the creation stories of Native people comes from the Jesuits writing them down. And the Jesuits are writing them down because they want to find out where these people came from. And they really like it when they find connections between their creation story and the creation story the Jesuits know from the book of Genesis. So they're recording these things and writing them down and writing the Jesuit Relations, which is a report of what these people are telling them. So much of what we know about the native people before all of this comes from the Jesuits furiously writing down what they were telling them. Okay, so anyway, talking about the Chesapeake and the group, the Spanish send an expedition to the Chesapeake. Has anyone been there, the Chesapeake Bay? Huge body of water. And along its shores, there are lots of different native people. And usually a few groups of villages would have an alliance, usually related by blood somehow, but you don't marry within your blood unit. This allows for marrying other communities, connecting them. So maybe
along this huge expansive body of water with big rivers flowing into it. Along these peninsulas, you'll find villages which have some connection with each other. And as with the villages of New England, they are harvesting oysters, other kinds of fish, doing a lot of fishing. The women are planting corn, beans, and squash. They're also growing tobacco. And as I said, most of these societies operate through a kind of consensus, but typically there is a head person, or there are different kinds of leadership among Native people. And the Europeans like it when there is one person in charge. They always want to know who is in charge. And often you come into a group, you say, who is in charge here? Who's in charge among you? It's a legitimate question. Is anyone here in charge?
The dean.
I mean, in this room. Imagine I am not here. Imagine I'm a stranger. I just walked in. Who's in charge? No one's in charge?
Whoever takes control of the situation at the time.
Okay, now I know who's in charge. Okay, so tell me about this group.
Or all the same.
Okay, thank you. Can I buy the air in this room? How come? You see, you're all breathing it, but if I own it, would you not be able to breathe it? Okay, see, so I've just identified the leader in the room because she's the one who spoke up. And so now she will be the one who explains everything to me. How about if I just buy their air from you?
You share the air with that, just by one.
Okay, if I'd ask you, would you sell their air? Okay, this is an honest group. This is really thwarting my attempt to buy the air. But here's the thing, land is another thing. The native people didn't have the same conception of land ownership as Europeans, because everyone's using it. How can someone actually own this? We're all passing over it. So it's a different conception of this. So for example, here in Massachusetts on the Shawmut Peninsula, William Blackstone says, hey, can I stay here? And they say, sure. I mean, other people have come and stayed, but then they leave. And it's no big deal, but it means something different to the Europeans. So anyway, they arrive at the Chesapeake, and thank you, by the way, we found out, well, the leader in the class, the first person who speaks up, that's who we know is the leader. And among Native people, there is someone they look to with respect, called a werewolves. And here in this particular group are called the Pamunkey. Name of the creek they are on. The Europeans have different names for things based on what people tell them. And in this case, they come to the Chesapeake and the Werewants, they suggest that, why don't you send your son back with us? We will educate him. And they arrive on these ships and they do have some pretty cool stuff, guns, other things. And they think it would be useful to learn how to use these things. He thinks, of course, it would be useful to learn these things against our traditional enemies. And so he does send his son off to be educated by the Spanish. And his son goes off. His son's, we don't know what his name was at this time. We'll get to this in a bit. He goes off to Spain. And he goes to a Spanish university. I think at this time, the university is run by Dominicans. You don't need to get into the differences between the Dominicans and the Jesuits. The Dominicans are the religious order given by the King of Spain the privilege of teaching the native people in the New World the gospel. They are the religious order responsible for the New World, which is why you have places like Santo Domingo. And
the Dominican symbol is the Newfoundland dog. And other kinds of things I could tell you that are of great interest to all of you. So anyway, the Dominicans have a college in Spain where this young man goes and he is baptized. He takes the name of Don Luis Velasco, which is also the name of Spain's viceroy in the New World. He spends 6 or 7 years at a Spanish college with these nice Dominicans, great times, and then they decide it's time to send him home because what they really want to do is have him go back to the New World and help to convert the rest of his people to the one true faith, have them be allies against the Spanish here in the Chesapeake so they can be a bulwark against the French, the Dutch, others who are trying to make inroads in this area. So they send him back, and the ship doesn't go directly from Spain to the Chesapeake. It goes from Seville, actually, to Mexico. And it gets to Mexico City, and the viceroy in Mexico City says it would really be stupid to send this guy back to his own people because what will he do there? He'll immediately go back to being a heathen and doesn't really think this is a good idea at all. So our friend spends a year or two in Mexico City, and in Spain, he met really nice folks who were really interested in converting him and others to the one true faith. And Mexico City is a little different. All of the native people in Mexico City are slaves. And there had been a lot more before the Spanish arrived. So this gives them something of a different idea about what the Spanish are all about. Plus the fact the viceroy isn't sending him back to his home. This is something that irks him. Finally, they do send him back, but the ship can't find the entrance to Chesapeake Bay, so it winds up back in Spain. Have you ever tried to find the entrance to Chesapeake Bay on a ship? It's not as easy as it sounds. And again, it's not like this is their only thing. They're just trying to get back to Spain. Making a stop in the Chesapeake is a sideshow. So again, he makes this other circuit back to Mexico City, then finally arrives back at his home. He's been gone now for about 7 or 8 years. And his father is dead. His brother is now the werewolves. And he's here with these, actually now they're no longer Dominicans, they're Jesuits who have brought him back. The Dominicans had fallen out of the king's favor. The king had put the Jesuits in charge. The Jesuits, I don't know if any of you have strong feelings about Dominicans versus Jesuits or know either one. The Jesuits are a tougher group. And he arrives with these Jesuit priests, and think about this. He has been gone for these 8 years, relatively young man, and spent all of his time with all these nice, very nice men at this Spanish university. Now suddenly he's back home. And he is a young, handsome man. And he does what a lot of young, handsome men do when they're suddenly back home among people he knows. He has a number of relationships with young women who are interested in hearing about his travels. And this is not something the Jesuits want him to do, but they hope he will become a priest. And Jesuits, like other members of the Catholic clergy, are celibate. So he has now sinned against the one true faith. And in the Catholic tradition, when you sin, what you have to do then is confess to everyone about what you have done. He doesn't think he's done anything wrong, and think about what all the Jesuits have, they kept him away for these additional years and so on. So they do have a public ceremony where he has to confess to everyone about all of the bad things he has done. And this, to him, is somewhat humiliating. So he goes off by himself, and they think, okay, he's going to reflect on what he has done wrong. The Jesuits are sure that they are brought him back to be an example. They don't think what he has just displayed is much of an example. They want to make atone for his sins. He goes off, and several days later, he comes back with a number of his friends, and they kill all the Jesuits. This does really put the kibosh on Spain's attempt
to cultivate a better relationship with these folks. And he also no longer is Don Luis Velasco. Instead, he takes the name Opechancanough, which means he whose soul is white. And we know over the next 2 decades, this is sometime in the 1570s, every time another European power tries to plant a colony, remember, his father had been fairly welcoming to the Spanish. We know that someone will set up shop here or try to trade, and the response is they get killed. And also his brother, who is near the Werowance, whom we know as Powhatan, begins making alliances with other communities here along the James and York River, so that by the end of the 1500s, there are about 13 or 30 or so towns in this area which have been joined together. As Don Luis Opechancanough has gotten a sense of what the Europeans are about. And it's at this point that they begin organizing in a way similar to what the Iroquois had been doing a century or so earlier. And it's to this area in 1607 that the English send their first successful colonial venture. And that is something, it actually meant to cover a whole lot more ground tonight, but that's where we are. I mean, these are kind of the big themes of what was happening over the 1500s, 1600s, 1700s, with these different European powers creating bases here for the purpose of extracting something and sending it back to the New World. And tobacco is going to be the thing that makes Virginia not only survive, but flourish. Initially, they want to find gold. And there's a company back in Europe that had financed this, and they want these guys to find gold. And they don't find gold, but in 1617, by 1617, they've managed to take tobacco from South America, really good tobacco. And tobacco grows here, but it's unmarketable in Europe because it's too harsh. The tobacco from this area, really good. So they take this tobacco and start growing it in Virginia, and that's going to become the cash crop that will make Virginia survive. So pick this, I want to take you on a walk now. I will take you on a walk now. What I really want to do is just keep talking, but I know you've probably suffered enough. So why don't we just quickly see who is here? Miranda, thank you. Nicholas Almeida, Nicholas, thank you. Brandon is here. Kate Carlson, thank you. Abba is here. Taylor Farrell, thank you. Noah, thank you. Logan Hawley, thank you, sir. Let's see, Chris Holmes is here. Caitlin Johnson, thank you. Lucian Keen's here. Okay. Paige Kennedy, Paige, there you are. Thank you. Yasmin Khan, Yasmin, nope. Amanda LaFrance, thank you. Emily Lawrence, thank you. Shay Loughnane, Lonane, how do you say it? Loughnane, thank you. Okay. Ellie Murray Martinez, thank you. Brandon Moran. Okay, Walter Portillo, thank you. Valeria, thank you. Glenda, thank you. Kira Rose, thank you. Yutu Sato is here. Okay. Andrew Sheehan, thank you. Stevie is here. Okay, Jordan Tedesco, thank you. Anna Veris, if I've called your name, you can head down to the lobby. And Jaden Wiles, thank you. Okay.
Lost and Legendary Writers tomorrow.
Yes,
So that's just 5 p.m. or
6:30.
6:30. It just show up.
Just show up, yeah.
Okay.
Your crazy man scribblings.
No. We want the dean to see.
I've already told her all your secrets.
Scary.
This is for your bow tie.
Okay.
Don't lose it. You face the consequences, elected Mike. I'll make sure to break everything. I hope it doesn't smack my control.
Well, you know, that's